Hello, and thank you for joining us on today's Ask Andrew show, Canada's first Facebook live streaming family law question and answer show. My name is Andrew Feldstein, and I'm the founder of GTA family law firm, Feldstein Family Law Group, with offices in Markham, Vaughan, Mississauga, and Oakville. Both myself and our entire team practice exclusively in the area of family law. Today, I'm joined by one of our senior associates, Anna Troy. She's been here at Feldstein Family Law Group for a fair bit of time now, and welcome to the show, Anna.
Thank you for having me, Andrew.
So today we're discussing creating a parenting agreement. Some people may think it's simple and straightforward, but there's actually a lot more to it. And this goes to how parents share the responsibilities and obligations towards their children. And perhaps you want to explain what is a parenting agreement.
Sure. So, a parenting agreement really deals with, I would say, two factors. One being what goes into decision making as it pertains to the kids. Generally, that covers any medical issues, any educational issues, such as what school should the children go to, if there's any psychoeducational assessments that are required,
Religion and mobility.
and religion and mobility. Thank you very much. So those are the major things that we set out in an agreement to reflect how the parties are to address them, who is to make decisions about them, and if it's a joint decision-making arrangement, then how does that factor into what those decisions should be? The second part is the parenting schedule, and that reflects which parent has the children at which time and what that arrangement should look like. There are various other issues that we address in a parenting arrangement, in addition to those two factors, but they're all more or less related
So
to decision-making and parenting arrangements.
So I want to break it up because you mentioned some things about Section 7s, like you talked about schooling and major activities. And what people, I want to clarify a few points because what people need to understand, if I have sole decision making of my children, I may be able to make that decision that they can enroll in private school. However, that doesn't mean that simply because I made the decision to enroll them in private school, that the other parent is going to be required to contribute to that expense because that's something that requires both parties' consent. So you may have the ability to make a decision to say, I'm enrolling the child in private school. I'm enrolling the child in, let's say, competitive hockey because you're the custodial parent, providing it doesn't impact on the other parent's time. But you're either going to need a mutual agreement or court order or a process to make a determination about who has to pay. So you have to realize decisions of what the children are going to do and responsibilities of payment can be two different issues. So the person who has sole decision making can't simply decide, I'm going to go pick a $50,000 a year private school for each of my three children, and my spouse, who makes 80% of the money, is going to have to pay for that. And that's something the viewers need to understand. Yes, that's a different issue, is payment, but I don't want people to walk away and think that you get to make a decision, you can force the other side to pay. So I want to discuss that briefly. The other part of decision making, I think our viewers need to appreciate, is a lot of things fall into place organically. And people, and I don't know if you see it, Anna, you see people come in and they still say, I want sole custody or I want sole decision making. And then you have to actually talk to them about what it means. And I'll give an example. Like, for example, if a client says, my religion's really important to me, what would be your answer to that? That they want sole decision making about religion?
Well, you ask if there is a dispute with the spouse on the religion. Are they of the same background? Are they of the same religion? If they're not of the same background and of the same religion, what is their ex-spouses or the other parents, I should say, views with respect to what religion the child should be raised in? And if they're on the same page, I don't know that a sole decision-making arrangement with respect to religion is really necessary. It seems that there's an agreement on that aspect.
Well, and even if there isn't an agreement, Look, you're 100% right that a lot of times people are married. I take my own separation. I'm Jewish. My ex-wife was Jewish. It became a no-brainer because we knew there wasn't going to be a dispute about our children being raised in the Jewish faith. That was important to both of us, as it may be for many families. However, it's what happens when maybe it's different sects of the same religion, i.e., somebody is really religious and spiritual and wants to take their child to the church or mosque or synagogue every weekend, and the other one on their parenting time doesn't. In those cases, a court's going to be really simple, and they're going to say to each parent, you do what you want to. And people have to appreciate, some people get really upset because sometimes somebody is more religious than the other parent and it really bothers them. And they're going to have to realize they can't control what goes on at the other spouse's home. Now, the other spouse also learns that if they want to get along and co-parent, making efforts to try and ensure that the children has some spirituality at home, if that's what historically was important during the marriage, will help them in terms of co-parenting. Because when you decide to go from being very religious and going to your place of worship every weekend to now never going and basically completely renouncing it, you are creating conflict. And you need to be mindful of that because that conflict may be completely unnecessary. And you may want to say, okay, you know what? I understand you're going to take the child to the place of worship and you're 2 weekends a month. Maybe once every month or two, I'll do the same. Uh, Giving them something, or on very important holidays, making sure that they're observing it. So there are some issues there that go into that. But in most cases, religion's not an issue. In most cases, schooling is not an issue because it goes to the school catchment where you live in. And the place where the school is really becomes an issue is when the parties separate and they both move out of the school catchment. And now it's which school catchment is better. That's, and I don't know if you've had the school, I think you've had some of the school catchment fights about which is the better school. And
Yeah.
how does it, and how, in your view, does that get resolved?
Well, again, we either need to come to an agreement between the parties, or we need a mediator or a mediator arbitrator, or we need the court to make the call. But you look at things like, we often adhere to the Fraser Institute for rankings. We look at, what the needs of the children are, and the specific school that is being proposed. There are certain aspects to each individual school that may be more in the child's best interest for this particular child that we're dealing with than the other school that's in the other catchment area. Of course, the parent that is within that catchment area is going to say that their school is better, and the other parent is going to say that their school is better. But there are more or less objective measures that we can look at to see what school really is in the best interest of the child. And there's a lot of factors that go into that. And if the parties can't resolve it amongst themselves and their lawyers, then yeah, we need to get third parties involved, and in the worst case scenario, a judge to make a decision.
Now, I'm going to say the school catchment fight are a hard one because the starting position, and you clearly set out the test, what's in the best interest of the child. That's the test. And if you have a child that's been in that catchment and has their friends in that catchment, 9 times out of 10, they're staying in that same school unless there's a specific reason for them to move, i.e., there's some sort of psychoeducational assessment, they have a passion for something and it's available at another school. But unless there's a really good reason, if one parent is in that catchment, the child's going to stay there. And I often will say to my clients, you're laying a foundation, when you have younger kids, you're laying the foundation for a future parenting plan. And the problem when you separate and your kids are younger as parents, we see our kids the way they are today. We don't see how they're going to be as they get older. So I sometimes will have parents who will say, well, I'm okay. I'm moving out. One parent staying in the house. They're going to be in the school catchment. I'm going to be a 10-minute drive away. It's not a big deal because I'll take my kids to all of their play dates because the kids are, 8 and 6, 7 and 5. They're that kind of age where the parents take them everywhere. And I'll say to them, you know what, that 10-minute drive, good for you. You're willing to do the driving. And when they're little kids and you control every aspect of their life, this is going to work. But how do you think it's going to work when the kids are in high school and they want to come home for lunch? How does it work on the weekends when the kids are in high school and they no longer want to ask you, hey, mom or dad, can you drive me to this kid's house? Because they just want to walk there when they want to go or take their bike there when they want to go. And that's what I mean by is when you're developing the parenting plan, and this isn't even a developing of the parenting plan, this is your planning. When you move far enough outside the catchment, you're actually shooting yourself in the foot that one day your child, who is now 7 years old, maybe 15 years old, and come home and say, Mom or Dad, I really want to live in the other parent's house full time. And you're going to say, well, why? Well, it has nothing to do with you, but it has to do with my friends come over there because they can all walk over. My friends are close, lots of little things like that. So I say this from the prospect of when you're looking at the parenting plan, don't just look at the kids today. To the parents who are watching, look at where your kids are going to be in 5 years, in 10 years. Don't always assume that they're little kids and waking up at 7 o'clock in the morning. And if you want to do a weekend exchange because it's Mother's Day or Father's Day and doing it at 7 o'clock in the morning or 8 o'clock in the morning is a good idea because one day they're going to be sleeping in much later than that. And you have to have those future eyes to appreciate what's going to happen. I'm going to shift over slightly now because we talked about the scheduling. And I'll make the same comment that I just did, which is the scheduling is different based on the ages of the children. And what type of schedules do you see?
Well, we see a whole variety of different schedules. We see schedules where one parent has the kids for 2 days, the other parent has the kids for 2 days, and then it's an alternating weekend, for example, which is the case when the parents have equal time. We have circumstances where one parent has the child 1 day per week, and alternate weekends, whereas the other parent has primary care of the children for the remainder of the days. We have week on, week off schedules where one parent will have the children for a full week and then the other parent will have the children for the following week. It really does depend on the children's ages, how close the parties are to each other in terms of their living accommodations, and where the school is, and again, the specific needs of that family and the children. So there are all sorts of arrangements out there that may work.
And it's interesting because when younger kids, and this is when I'm assuming when both parents have been involved prior to the separation, so that you're looking at a joint schedule because it may be an equal parenting time schedule versus somebody as a primary caregiver. When the kids are little, we'll do what's called a 2-2-5 frequently, which is, and it's confusing and it's not easy for parents. It's where week one, the kids are with one parent Monday, Tuesday, the other parent Wednesday, Thursday, and then they go back to the other parent from Friday to Monday. And then it switches now to a different parent, and week two gets Monday, Tuesday, and the other parent gets Wednesday, Thursday. So it flips. There's nothing easy about that schedule as a parent because there's nothing logical or intuitive in that schedule. When kids are a little older, they go to the week about, as we would call week on, week off, or a 2-2-5 schedule. And that one is one parent gets every Monday, Tuesday, the other one gets Wednesday, Thursday, and you alternate weekends. That one is far simpler for parents and kids because it's alternating weekends, fine, everybody gets that. But as one parent, every Monday, Tuesday, those are my days. I remember when my kids were little, now they both off in university, everybody in my office and many people in the legal community knew that if I was scheduling something, odds are it wasn't going to be a significant event on a Monday or Tuesday because I had school pickup. And that was just, there's no choice. I got to be at school pickup. But it makes it very easy in your own mind to know how to plan things. And the same for your kids, because then if they want to make plans with one of their friends, they know if they're talking about Monday, and if it was me, call dad. If it's Wednesday, call mom to get permission. And they know the way the schedule is going to work. And that has its advantages. And like anything else, there's advantages and disadvantages. And it has to be best interest of the children, but part of best interest for the children, in my view, and some lawyers may disagree, may be work obligations because it's still best interest of the children to have mom and dad employed. And what do I mean by that? Sometimes the reason for in an equal time schedule be week on, week off is one parent has a lot of travel for their job and it requires them to be away a week at a time. So you may prefer the week on, week off because that week when one parent doesn't have the child, they're traveling for work. So that 225 schedule just, it's not feasible. And somebody may say, why do I need to cooperate? That's helping my former spouse. That's not something that's going to be viewed upon favorably for a court, is it, Anna?
Absolutely not.
I mean,
It's
a judge,
very
go-
self-interested position. At the end of the day, as a parent, you need to be able to put your children first and at the forefront. And if helping your spouse ultimately delivers a benefit to your children, then as a parent, you have an obligation to do that.
and a judge is going to look at it and say, if you're not willing to accommodate the work schedule that's generating a significant income for the family, which is for the benefit of the family and for the benefit of the kids, you should be willing to accommodate them in terms of the parenting schedule if it's possible and reasonable under the circumstances, because that's in the best interest of the kids. And some parents struggle with that concept. And I try to explain to them, you're not going to be looking very good in the eyes of a judge. And they say, but it doesn't matter. I'm not worried about that. They can't get more parenting time than that. And if they're the recipient of support, I may turn around and say to them, okay, but there's going to be a range of spousal support if you're the recipient that you're going to get between low, mid, and high. And if you put up a fuss, where do you think the judge is going to exercise their discretion? And when there are issues that a judge can exercise discretion, if they think you're really being nasty on one area, they're probably going to exercise it against you. So I say that because I think it's really important for people to understand optics of the way you conduct yourself as a parent matter and spill over into everything. And it's really important to be child focused. And one of the principles is, unless there's a problem with that parent, that it's good for children to have a positive relationship with both parents. And you should always, as a parent, be promoting that positive relationship with the other parent, because that will mean that your child will mature to be a healthier and better person. And as parents, that's what we all want. Now, we talked about a schedule. We talked about in the parenting agreement that there's decision making. We talked about the general schedule, but there's also other issues that come up. So, how do we deal with things like holidays and vacations and things like that?
So again, we set out specific terms within the agreement very often to address these various issues, specific holidays, whether it's Christmas, whether it's Easter, whether it's various long weekends. What do we do with PD days, PA days? What happens when a child is home sick on a day that they should be in school? And all sorts of issues related to that are generally addressed by an agreement. Now, again, we're dealing with people, we're dealing with children, we're not dealing with robots. So there is a dynamic component to a family. So there has to be some flexibility. There has to be some level of perhaps review at a later stage or an adjustment to these terms, because as you noted earlier, what may work for a 5-year-old child is not going to work for a 15-year-old child. A schedule that may be appropriate for a young child is not going to be appropriate for somebody in their teens. So we do put those terms in. We try our best to plan for the future and to leave some flexibility open, but it's not always possible.
And here's what I'm going to say to everybody. When you do your agreement that includes a parenting plan, your objective after you do that agreement is to save it on your computer and, God willing, never look at it, because you and your former spouse can just make decisions amicably, give and take when somebody says, I need a day for this, or I need a day for that, or I want an adjustment for that. That's the most successful agreement, is one that you don't look at. Because the reason you're looking at your agreement is because there's conflict. And it's really meant as a fallback. So when there is conflict, there's rules for the conflict. So when we're talking about doing a parenting agreement, there are certain things we start with. We start with one, the schedule takes into account the best interest of the children. We start with that when you talk about Christmas break and March break and long weekends, you're really trying to get it to be even with both parents. If a family celebrates Christmas, the Christmas break is going to be typically divided in half. And don't fight about it, because that's what every judge is going to do. And Christmas Eve and Christmas Day will be divided. And 1 year it'll go, one person gets Christmas Eve, the other one gets Christmas Day, and it'll flip the identical schedule the next year so it's balanced. The only time that's really doesn't happen for people who celebrate Christmas is when they agree to do it differently because one family says we celebrate Christmas Eve and the other family says we celebrate on December 25th. That become that becomes really easy because they're both happy with that and they both win. Um, I also think if one person doesn't celebrate Christmas and the other one does, you might be willing to say, okay, I'm going to give you I'll give you the first half of every Christmas holiday because I know you want to have Christmas Day. And you may turn around. So if it was a Jewish person and say, but I want to make sure that I get the Jewish high holidays every year in return. And you spell it out in the agreement. So that way there's no issue. And those things can frequently just, in essence, almost fall into place because for a lot of people, it's really obvious. And sometimes the only questions are you take long weekends that you mentioned earlier. I always say to my clients, there's two ways of dealing with it. One way is you say, in even years, one person gets Thanksgiving, the other person gets Thanksgiving in odd years. And you go through all the long weekends of the year and you specify that. That's one way. And there's nothing wrong with that way. However, there's a downside to that way. Sometimes somebody will get 3 weekends in a row,
Right.
right? And it is what it is, and the clients will phone up and complain about it. Then the other way to do it is saying, okay, well, let's just alternate weekends and extend them for the period of whatever the holiday is. And somebody may say, well, I'm going to lose out because I may get one fewer long weekend during the year, but that schedule also gives you predictability to know where the kids are and you never go 3 weekends. Nothing's perfect. I say to people, pick your poison. For my own separation, I like doing the alternating weekends because I'm a very regimented person when it comes to my schedule. It's planned sometimes a year out. That just allows me to flow through that way. Uh, but that's me. It's a personal judgment to some people. Thanksgiving or Easter weekend may be critically important and they don't want to take that chance. Some people will just say, let's divide the Easter weekend every year, including Fridays and Mondays. For summer holidays, what do you usually suggest for your clients?
I usually suggest, a week on, week off arrangement. Sometimes my clients want 2 consecutive weeks, but we generally divide the summer holidays equally between the parties.
Yeah.
Children
And
are
that's
home from
exactly it.
school.
And sometimes people will say, well, the kids are too young to do 2 weeks. And that gets to the point we talked about earlier. You may say, okay, at 5 years old, they are too young to be away from each parent for 2 weeks, but maybe when they get to 10 years old, we'll be good with it. Sometimes the question is, why does somebody want 2 weeks? And one parent may be a big traveler. I want to take the kids on trips. I want to go overseas to visit my parents. And you're going to say to the client, they have a good reason. And if they're getting 2 weeks, then you're going to get 2 weeks, even if you stay in the city. And you got to tell your client that has the 2 weeks to go to Europe or go wherever they want to turn around and say, but you got to appreciate if they're staying in town, you're not getting any parenting time in that 2 weeks. And you got to appreciate that. What's good for one is going to be good for the other. And I always remember when I was a young lawyer, a judge said to me in chambers one day, you know, people come and they argue about vacations, and it's so obvious to us. We're going to do even every time, unless there's some really, really good reason not to. So people need to realize that. The other place we get into a dispute sometimes is about when someone wants to, during their vacation, take the child on vacation. And how do you usually deal with that in agreement?
When they want to take the
Take the
child.
child to go away somewhere, go outside of Canada.
Well, you need generally a consent signed by the other side for the parent to do that, just so that you don't have any issues at the border. I don't know if that's what your question is
That's
referring to.
exactly
All
what my
right.
question
And
is.
so, you often get into a fight whether the other side will or will not provide this authorization to travel, because you very well may buy your ticket, plan your vacation, pay for everything, get to the airport with the child, and be told that you can't go anywhere because you don't have a notarized consent letter from the other parent. So this is something that we deal with often. This is very often the subject of urgent motions at our firm, because you got to rush into court and get a judge to dispense with the other person's consent to enable the child to travel.
And you need to realize if the other person has the passport, you also need their passport for the
That's right.
child, that is. And and the challenge that that creates sometimes is the person who has the passport holds on to it in essence for dear life because they know that that's leverage. And what I'll say to some of my clients is this goes to planning your life. If you want to plan a vacation with your child and you're in conflict with your former spouse, you need to plan your vacation early. You need to follow the letter of what your agreement was for the days. But if you're one of those people who are lucky and have done the hard work and get along with your former spouse, you may be able to say, oh, you know what? I can save $1,500 if I leave on Friday of the Christmas break instead of Saturday. Can you consent? And they'll say, okay, sure, go ahead. Because one day they may ask for the same indulgence, and you should say, okay. But if you know that you're in conflict, you know you're not going to get that extra day. And part of it is it's something that goes both ways. And the other thing too happens sometimes you want to take the kids on surprise trips or vacations. And if you're getting along, it's going to be really easy. If it's not, part of your mental thought of the cost of the trip may be having to hire a lawyer to pay to go to court because you'll never get all your costs back going to court. The other side's downside is the court may say to the other side, you were really foolish. You should have never done this. You're going to pay a good chunk of their costs, and they don't need your consent anymore. So there are real consequences to this. Sometimes the best solution for people is if they can agree, is to hire a parenting coordinator who can arbitrate these decisions if there is no agreement. But the problem is the person who is planning on playing games will never agree to a parenting coordinator because they like the idea that now you have to go through the time and expense to go to court when you have small hiccups. And there's a lot of little things that go in an agreement too, telling people to be reasonable. Is there anything else that you'd want to add about things that you're thinking of that you take into account when drafting agreements?
Well, I actually, just to touch on the point of a parenting coordinator, I actually love the idea of including a parenting coordinator in my agreements. I encourage my clients very much to do that because going back to our earlier discussion, a parenting agreement can often be an evolving document because things change, times change, children's needs change, and you cannot predict and anticipate every single issue that may come up in a parenting arrangement. And so I think it's incredibly helpful to have a third party that you can go to almost immediately, and that can make a decision if the parties still cannot agree after mediating the issue, that is binding on the parties. A parenting coordinator does have limits as to what they can or cannot arbitrate on, but for day-to-day issues and conflicts that may arise, especially if it's a high conflict family, I very much encourage bringing on a parenting coordinator for that step. And actually doing it at the time that you are drafting the agreement and early on in the process may avoid what you were talking about earlier, Andrew, with one spouse who wants to play games, not agreeing to it after.
Well, and I always I remember a situation where there's no parenting agreement. You need a decision made quickly. Courts aren't quick. They're not fast, even if it's an urgent motion. And there's a person who their parent passed away, and the other parent was refusing to let them take them to the funeral, insisting that they should take the children to the funeral instead of the parent whose parent passed away and allowing those kids to go with the family. And that was a very awkward situation because if there's no parenting coordinator who's involved,
Yeah.
how are you going to get that parent to say okay? And you're left with that person saying, no, it's my parenting time. I'm taking the kids. Because I can tell you, if there's a parenting coordinator involved, you'd probably arrange an emergency phone call. The parenting coordinator would make an award in about 2 minutes to say the kids are going with that parent and their family. And
Talk
it's
about the
over and done
reasonableness
with.
clause.
Exactly. So I see that we're out of time now. Time went very fast. So thank you for joining the show today. Today, we've been able to explore a number of considerations to keep in mind when drafting a parenting agreement to ensure it's workable for your situation and accounts for changes that may occur over time. If you're looking for assistance as part of your separation or divorce matter, feel free to contact us. Take a look at our website, separation.ca. The next Ask Andrew show will be on Tuesday, November 25th at 12 noon. If you have any requests or ideas for future shows, please email them to us at info@feldsteinfamilylaw.com. And thank you for watching.